I've had a mantra as I was walking up: do not say good morning. Do not say good morning. And that is my first instinct. It's so good, isn't it, to be able to come together. So thankful that we're able to come together. I know anytime when the weather gets like this, we don't want to put people in danger. We don't want to put people in jeopardy in any kind of way. And so moving it to the afternoon like this, whereas it gets us out of our comfort zone a little bit, but it is a blessing, isn't it? So we can start the week together. One thing that I was able to do this morning that I'm normally not able to do, once a month, the congregation in Riga, Latvia, they meet later so that some in America who are connected to the church over there can actually join in via Zoom. And I was able to do that this morning. And normally I wouldn't be able to because of time factors and my paranoia and doing last-minute prep. But it got me to thinking about missionaries. It got me to thinking about missionaries, and I don't know that we understand or maybe recognize or maybe even think about that what an amazing family the church is. At the local level, absolutely, but also on a global level. That we're a part of a global family, a multi-ethnic family who speak all kinds of different languages, and who are gathered today all around the world to celebrate who we are and what we have in Jesus. We get to be a part of that family. And in thinking of missionaries, we have to be so thankful for them. Because when we think about what compels someone to leave home, to go somewhere else, to live as a foreigner, to show the love of Jesus to their neighbors, that's exactly what we're talking about all year long, this idea of faith, this idea of loyalty. Because it's faith and loyalty that compels people to do that. And when we say faith, again, just like we said last week, it's not what happens in our mind and in our heart, but faith is this idea of a loving loyalty. It's the idea of pledging ourselves to Jesus, to say, my life belongs to you, and my love belongs to you, and my loyalty belongs to you. It's this allegiance. It's this fidelity. It is this faithfulness to say, I will go where you need me to go. I will do what you need me to do. I belong to you, Jesus. And that's not just a small group of Christians, a select few super Christians. It's for every single follower of Jesus. Our loyalty has to belong to Him. That's what it is. That's what it means to have faith in Jesus. In fact, I would go so far as to say it like this, and this is a bold claim, I understand it, but if your loyalty belongs to Jesus, if your loyalty is to Jesus, then you are a missionary. And so I want us to kind of marinate in that thought for a second, just to think about that, just for a second. If your loyalty is to Jesus, then you are a missionary. If your loyalty is to Jesus, then you have said that you are going to live as a stranger and as a foreigner and as a sojourner, no matter where you are. Whether you go somewhere else or you stay where you were born. Even if you stay in the city and in the county in which you were born, you stay as a foreigner, as a sojourner, as a stranger. And if you go somewhere else, then you're a stranger there. And you're a foreigner there. And you live as a sojourner there because your citizenship belongs somewhere else. So if you are a Christian, if your faith is in Jesus, if your loyalty is to Jesus, then you are a stranger, a foreigner, a sojourner, an exile, wherever you are. And you have to think about yourself in that way. And going further than that, just a step further than that, we're on a mission. We're on a mission. We've been given this great commission by Jesus. We've been sent out into the world to love, to do good, to make disciples, to tell them about the good news about Jesus. So if you stay in the city and the state and the country in which you were born, you do so as a missionary. And if you go somewhere else, you go there as a missionary. But let's be honest, we don't really think of ourselves in that way, do we? We don't. When we talk about missionaries, we think about a select group. We think about people who and it's not to take away from those that we call missionaries, what they're doing, but we need to adopt this mentality. Whether you go or whether you stay. If we stay as missionaries. But so often we don't think like this because we put so much emphasis in building our home. Whether we mean a house or we mean a city or we mean a country, and we want to make the home great. And we want to make our home beautiful. We want to grow deep roots where we are. We're not content to be exiles. Because an exile, a foreigner, a sojourner, they're outsiders. And it's extremely hard to live like an outsider, to feel that way. In fact, the book of Hebrews, you could say, is written to a group of people, and they were tired of feeling like outsiders. They were tired of being Christians. They were tired of giving their loyalty to Jesus. If that meant that they had to live as strangers and foreigners and exiles and sojourners in the place that they knew, the place that they grew up, this used to feel like home, but you know what? It doesn't feel like home anymore. And they were tired of being outsiders. And they were tempted to go back to being insiders. And maybe one of the themes you could say of the book of Hebrews is this idea that home is where your hope is. Home is where the hope is. You know, we often put all kinds of categories on this idea of home, you know, and home is where the heart is, or home is where my family is, or home is where you hang your hat. With the book of Hebrews, the reality is home is where the hope is. Your home is yet to come. And this is some of the phrases that we see. There's some of the phrases that the book of Hebrews will use that I think it's important to really wrap our hearts and our minds around. The book of Hebrews says that the world to come will be subject to humanity. He says in these opening chapters of Hebrews that the world as it is not really subject to us. But the hope is that the world to come will be subject to humanity. And then he talks about these better and abiding possessions in chapter 10 and verse 34. And that's why they were so willingly just being joyful to accept the plundering of their property, because they knew that they had better possessions. They had abiding possessions that no one could steal, no one could take away from them. Our hope is at chapter 11, verse 35, that we will rise again to a better life. This is our hope. Chapter 12 and verse 27, the shakable things of this present life and world will be removed. But the hope is that the unshakable things will remain like this kingdom that we are receiving. We're receiving an unshakable kingdom. And that's why, again, this year we're talking about this unshakable commitment that we have in response to God's unmerited favor. That God has shown us unmerited favor, and in response to that, we have this unshakable commitment to Him because our hope is unshakable. The kingdom we're receiving is unshakable. And then finally, in chapter 13 and verse 14, we seek the city that is to come. And this is going to be pertinent for today's lesson, that our city is not one of these shakable cities. Every city we've ever put a foot in is a shakable city. It can be shaken. It can be destroyed. And one day it will be. It doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how rich, doesn't matter how powerful a city is or thinks that it is. You go back and you look at Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a glorious city, and it was shakeable. Rome was a glorious city, and it was shakeable. But our city, the city that is to come, is unshakable. And that is our hope. And that is our home, because our home is where our hope is. So if you have your Bible, let's look at Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to begin this afternoon, in verse 8. Here's what the Hebrew writer says about Abraham. He says, by faith, that is, because of Abraham's loyalty to God, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out. He left his home and he went to the land of Canaan because he was told that this was going to be his inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying, God said this land is yours. But yet when he went there, he lived like a stranger, like a foreigner, like an exile. And his son lived that way. And his grandson lived that way. They lived as foreigners in the land that God said, this land is yours. But none of the things that were established there were theirs. They knew these cities are not ours. These aren't our cities. These houses, they're not our houses. These buildings, they're not our buildings. And so they lived like strangers there. They didn't really put roots down there. They lived in tents there. And what is that? What is it that the Hebrew writer is saying to his audience? He's saying, yeah, it's true. It's true. It's true what Jesus says. The meek will inherit the earth, but not these cities and not these buildings. You have to be content by faith to live as exiles. You have to be content to live as sojourners. You have to be content to live as strangers and foreigners, even in this place that you know, the place that you were born. You live like an outsider here. You have to live like a foreigner here, just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look at verse 10. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. See, that's what loyalty compels us to do. That's what faith compels us to do. It's to wait for that city, the city that is to come, the city that is lasting, the city that is better, the city that is abiding, the city that is unshakable. And he says Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they were waiting for that city. They were surrounded by towns and villages and cities that were not theirs. They didn't try to take them. They didn't try to make them great and make them beautiful and grow deep roots down there. They said, this is our promise, but we're waiting for a better city, an abiding city, a lasting city. And again, what is the Hebrew writer saying to his audience? If you have loyalty to God, if you have faith in God, you need to do the same. You need to consider yourselves to be foreigners here. Be content to be an outsider. Be content living in tents. Be content knowing that these cities around you are shakeable cities. They're not lasting cities. But you have a city that is to come. Look at verse 11. By faith, Sarah herself can receive power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him, talking about God, faithful, who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. I want you to see something here, something that we're going to explore a lot this year. The same Greek word, the same root word that is translated as faith, where it says by faith over and over again through this chapter. Sarah, by faith, that's the same root word where it says she considered him, God, faithful. The Greek word is this word pistis. And so our faith is a response to God's faith or God's faithfulness. Or in other words, our faithfulness to God is a response to God's faithfulness to us. Sarah was faithful to God. She was loyal to God because she knew that God was loyal. She held on. She trusted. Why? Because she knew that God was trustworthy. That's why faithfulness is so much more than just something that happens in your mind or in your heart. It's about faithfulness. It's about fidelity. It's about allegiance. It's about loyalty. And when you're faithful to God, it's because you know that God can be trusted. You know that God is faithful. And if he makes a promise, he's going to keep his promise, even when that promise seems absurd. Absolutely absurd. Here's this little old couple, him as good as dead. She's so old that she's way beyond her childbearing years. And you know, if God promised, even if it seems absurd, it's going to be a reality. And that's the heart of loyalty. It's that we are loyal to God, not just because we're great people. It's not because we're so good. It's because we know that He's such a great God, that we know He is faithful, and He will always keep His promises. Look at verse 13. These, talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised. Read that phrase again. Not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. Writer says they spent their whole lives. They lived and breathed and worked, and they died, and at their death, they still hadn't received what God had promised them. Why? He said, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you're going to inherit this land. This land's going to be yours and your descendants. But when they died, it wasn't theirs yet. They could see a way off in the future. And that's what loyalty is, isn't it? That's what faith is. It's living in the present in light of what you know the future holds because God has promised it. And Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, they lived their lives knowing that God is going to come through. God is going to give us what He promised. But they themselves, they didn't get to see it with their eyes. They only saw it by faith. And they lived and they died in faith. And again, what's the point? Why is the writer telling this to his audience? Why is this preacher up there preaching this to his listeners? Because we are all strangers and exiles on the earth. Everything we see around us that seems solid, that seems glorious, that seems trustworthy, and oh man, we're all tempted just to put our loyalty and our faith in these things, aren't we? To say, hey, this is always going to be here. This is a rock that I can trust in. This is a rock that I can stand on. And here is his audience, and they were tempted to put their faith in and to give their loyalty to places like Jerusalem or the temple. But he wanted them to understand that the temple is shakeable. Jerusalem is shakeable. Your city, the city that is to come, the new Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, that city is unshakable. And right now, we have to be content to live as a foreigner, as an exile, as a sojourner. Because these aren't our cities. This isn't our home. You're here. We're here, and we've got to live and maybe even die by faith, loyal to God, knowing that even if we don't see it in our lifetime, it's going to come to pass. Why? Because God is loyal. Because God is faithful. Because God keeps His promises. Look at verse 14. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. Hold on to that. We're going to come back to that in a minute. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. And so here's people like Abraham, they were homesick, but not for the place where he was born, not for Ur of the Chaldees, not there. Because if he was homesick for that place, he could have just gone back to that place, but he was homesick for a future place. In fact, that phrase, seeking a homeland, the Greek word for homeland there is the word patris. And I want us to know that simply because it's the root word for English words like patriot, patriotism, patriotic, patrice. Why? Because it's a loyalty to your homeland. It's a loyalty to your fatherland. And that's what it is to be patriotic, right? It's to be loyal to your homeland. And so Abraham lived as a person whose homeland he had never seen. It wasn't the place where he was born, and in a way, it wasn't even the place where he resided, because he had to reside there as a stranger and a foreigner, because the city he was looking for was a city that was still yet to come. And again, why is the Hebrew writer telling his audience this? Because he's telling them Jerusalem isn't your Patrice. Jerusalem isn't your homeland. The land of Israel, as it is, this is not your homeland. Rome is not your homeland. And this is a lesson that every single generation of the church has to learn. Your Patrice, your homeland, your fatherland is not in any of these cities that can be seen. It's not in any of these countries that can be seen. Not even, dare I say, even in the state of Tennessee. It's not in any state that can be seen. And we have to be so very careful that we don't make this city or this state or this country our Patrice. This is not our homeland. This is not our fatherland. We're waiting for our homeland because home is where our hope is. And here in this city, in this land, in this state, we live as foreigners. We live as exiles. We live as strangers, just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here the Hebrew writer, he's encouraging his audience, be loyal. And this is what loyalty looks like. Loyalty looks like your loyalty belongs to Jesus, not to this place. Because eventually, and not too long after this, Jerusalem's going to be attacked and destroyed. And even the Jewish Christians, they were told not to fight, not to defend Jerusalem. Why? Because this is not your Patrice. This is not your homeland. This is not where your loyalties lie. Your loyalties lie in a city that is yet to come. Look at verse 16. But as it is, they desire a better Patrice, a better country, a better homeland that is a heavenly one from heaven. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. And that's good news, isn't it, church? Because everywhere we look, every other Patrice, every other homeland, every other country is shakeable. It's temporary. It's fading away. But we're waiting for a heavenly Patrice. We're waiting for a heavenly homeland, a heavenly city, a city that is unshakable. And God says, it's yours. If you trust me, if you are loyal to me, then I'm not ashamed to be your God. And I've prepared for you this city, and this city is yours, and you're going to inherit this city. But you have to remember who you are right now. You have to remember where your loyalties lie right now. We have to be like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And man, it would be so easy, wouldn't it? Be so easy if you were one of these men to say, well, this is our land, and we're going to take it, and we're going to build our own city. But instead, they lived as strangers, even in the land that was promised to them. And for generations, they lived as strangers. And the Hebrew writer is writing to his audience saying, you have to have the same kind of loyalty and faith to hold on, to wait for the Lord. He will give you everything that he has promised. You have a city, but this Jerusalem is not your city. Rome is not your city. Antioch is not your city, your homeland, your fatherland. Your city is still yet to come. And that's a lot to apply, isn't it? That's a lot to apply. Because our loyalty is to Jesus rather than a place on the map. Our loyalty is to Jesus rather than a place on a map. And that was true for Abraham. His loyalty was to God, to Yahweh, rather than a place on a map. And that was true for the Hebrew writer and for the writer's audience back in the first century. Their loyalty was supposed to be to Jesus rather than a place on the map. And that has to be true for us today. So what would happen? What would happen if we adopted this mentality? If our loyalty truly was to Jesus rather than a place on the map? All of a sudden it'd be a whole lot easier, wouldn't it? A whole lot easier to go into all the world and preach the gospel. If we really believe this, if we really embrace this, then so many more of us would go into the world to preach the gospel, to take the love of Jesus to all the nations and to all the people. Why? Because our loyalty is to Jesus and not to a particular place. And so we would go. And we'd preach the gospel in every country, because in every country we're no more, no less a foreigner or a stranger than we are right here. If we really embrace this, then our brothers and our sisters in every nation of every tribe, of every language, would be truly our compatriots. Who are our compatriots? It's the people who share our loyalties, who are loyal to the same fatherland, who are loyal to the same patrice, who are loyal to the same homeland, who are loyal to the same. Who are these people? They're Christians. They're followers of Jesus. And if someone is a follower of Jesus and lives even on the other side of the world and speaks a different language other than the one I speak, they may look extremely different than I look, and they come from a very different culture, but that's my family. That's my brother. It's my sister. Even more so than someone who lives in the same country as me, but doesn't follow the same king as me. But do we really think like that, though? We say it. We say those are our brothers and our sisters, but have we really embraced that reality? Because our loyalty is to King Jesus rather than to a place on a map. And if we really embrace this reality, then even people who are not followers of Jesus, no matter where they're from, they're our neighbors. They're our neighbors. No more, no less than anyone else. Why? Because our loyalty is not to a place on a map. Our loyalty is to King Jesus. And so wherever a person is from, whatever language they speak, whatever their culture, whatever their background, they are our neighbors. And we're thankful to love them and show them the love of Jesus. And we change so much about the way we live our lives, wouldn't we? And that's why it's so important that we embrace this reality, that faith just isn't about what you believe is going to happen when you die. Faith isn't just about your personal religion. Faith is about your loyalty. Who has your loyalty? Where does your loyalty lie? Because we face every single day, we face things that test our loyalties. And every single day, we have to constantly decide, where do my loyalties lie? If we're followers of Jesus, then our home is where our hope is. And our loyalty is to Jesus rather than a place on the map. And so many of us, if we would embrace this reality, we'd be teaching our kids, hey, you go into all the world and you preach the gospel. We'd be loving the church locally, yes, but globally as well. We'd be loving our neighbors better if this is where our loyalties lie. You see, this is the commitment that we made when we were baptized, whether we knew it or not. Maybe we just knew that Jesus was going to wash our sins away, and that's true. And maybe we knew that God was going to give us the gift of His Spirit, and that's true. But we're also pledging ourselves to Him. We're saying to Him, I'm going to take up my cross and follow you. My citizenship now is in the heavenly city. Now my home is there, and my loyalty is there. And now my allegiance is to you, King Jesus, and to your kingdom. And my brothers and sisters, my family, they're your people wherever they are from. And my neighbor is everyone. That's the commitment we were making when we became followers of Jesus. But constantly, voices around us, they keep telling us to shift our allegiance, shift our loyalty. And it could be the case that maybe some of us have. And maybe some of us here this afternoon, we're ready to pledge ourselves and our commitment, our love and our life and our loyalty to King Jesus by being baptized. But maybe some of us just need to recommit ourselves to King Jesus and to His kingdom. Or maybe you just need prayers and encouragement, because it's hard being an outsider. It's difficult living as an outsider. And sometimes we want to shift our allegiance so that we can feel like an insider again. But listen to the writer of Hebrews. Take his encouragement and don't do that. Hold on. Hold on to King Jesus and let Him be the one to whom you commit your undying, unshakable loyalty. And this afternoon, if we can help you with that in any way, shape, or form, Make this invitation yours right now. As together we stand and sing.